Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining our webinar panel today, Harnessing Logistics Technology to Combat Cargo Theft and Fraud in a Freight Recession. Sounds a bit ominous, but we've got an incredible panel here today, which I'll introduce in a moment. A couple of just quick housekeeping things. If you have any questions as we're going through this discussion, there's a little chat box. Please open that box and just type your question in, and we'll do our very best to get to it. And if not, we'll circle back with you after the event to answer any unanswered questions. So please feel free to add your questions to the panel. And in case you're wondering, the event will be recorded, and we will send out a recording to all of the panelists or all of the attendees within 24 hours of the completion of this panel. So with that, we have a star-studded cast of characters today, starting with Krenar Komoni, the founder and CEO of Tive, Jordan Graft, the founder and CEO of Highway, Lucas Schorer, the co-founder and president of Kestrel Insights, and monitoring our panel, many of you know Eric Johnson, who's the senior logistics technology editor for the Journal of Commerce. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Eric and take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks to Tive for inviting me to lead this discussion. I would say I'm super excited to talk for the next hour, but it's a little bittersweet to have to talk about this subject, because the reason we're all here is because the industry is facing a huge challenge, the likes of which it hasn't seen before. From a cargo theft and cargo fraud perspective. So I'm really excited to dig into some of the ways that our panelists can help all of you understand the scale of the problem, and also hopefully by the end understand some solutions or some first steps at least to take in terms of mitigating or avoiding some of the threats that are out there. So as Steve mentioned, this is all sort of happening in the backdrop of a freight market that is undergoing some challenges right now. I would say predominantly on the capacity side. It's not that there's no freight that's moving, it's just that there's a lot of capacity, and that's putting downward pressure on pretty much anyone who is providing a service to shippers these days. So we have this threat of a lot of different types of fraud and theft confronting shippers and those service providers, all in a really margin compressed industry. So we're going to talk about that and some ways that technology are helping to fight those threats, and then just sort of give some best practices about first steps to take, no matter if you're a carrier, a broker, or a shipper. But before we do that, Steve introduced our panelists, but I would love for them to each individually kind of give a little bit of background on who they are and what their company does. And then we're going to kick off the discussion with a little bit of a background on kind of like how this threat has evolved and sort of exploded over the last couple of years. Krenar, do you want to maybe first talk a little bit about yourself and Tive?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Eric. Thanks again for participating and organizing and helping us on this. Really appreciate it. Lucas and Jordan, great to have you guys here and looking forward to the discussion. My name is Krenar Komoni. I'm the CEO and founder here at Tive. What we do here at Tive is pretty straightforward. We help companies all over the world track shipments. We have more than 600 customers globally, and we help them at any given time understand where their shipments are, but also their condition. How hot, how wet, how cold, did somebody open trailers, containers? But we'll go into all those details a little bit more. But that's Tive.
Cool. Yeah, always great to talk, Krenar. Jordan, love to hear a little bit more about yourself and Highway.
Yeah. Hey, my name is Jordan Graft. I'm the CEO of Highway. Highway provides carrier identity solutions to freight brokers and 3PLs. So our goal is to keep fraud out of brokers, carriers, networks before it happens. And we're based here in Dallas, Texas. We serve about 375 brokers here in the US.
Cool. Lucas, great you could join us today. Tell us a little about yourself and Kestrel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So Lucas Schorer, founder of Kestrel Insights, and we are about all things geofencing, specifically bringing a new level of automation and accuracy to the way teams actually access the geofences they need and get them into the programs where they're using geofences today. So we're a data company looking to be your partner, and I'm sure we'll dive into lots of things today on how geofences kind of help weed out fraud and theft and give you solutions for those scenarios. So looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Really interesting. I think 3 different technology providers in different categories that all sort of are quite complementary with one another. So really interested to kind of hear how each of you is tackling your piece of the puzzle. Let's maybe first broaden out a bit before we talk specifically about what you all are doing. I had alluded, Steve alluded, the market is in a pretty tricky space right now. I know none of you yourselves are moving freight either as on the shipper side or on the service provider side, but you must be talking to all of these players. Can you give a flavor, maybe individually, of kind of what you're seeing from the market perspective and sort of what sorts of pressures there are and how that's maybe manifesting in how much budget companies have and how willing they are to sort of like look at technology to help them solve challenges that are maybe outside of, you know, demand and supply?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't mind jumping in.
Call on someone. Yeah, go ahead, Lucas.
No, it's all good. I don't mind jumping in. I think from our perspective, what's really interesting as being a data company is we're like a lot of people, but I think us more than others sometimes as data providers is we're dead in the water without partners. And what's different with the sales process with services versus goods you can beat someone up on price and you guys go your separate ways. You sell, you buy, you go off. With services, it's really got to be a win-win, so that way when you go to work together afterward and provide that service, no one feels like they got shorted or anything like that. So I saw an interesting report from Uber Freight, kind of their Q4 market outlook, about how with the capacity and where it's at, making sure shippers almost don't beat up too much sometimes, because you want to make sure carriers aren't enticed to try and add other revenue to their top line and things like that. Maybe I heard an interesting case with, hey, if there's extra room in a trailer, picking up other loads and things like that, where if they feel like they got shorted or they're getting beat up on rates too much, they start to think of other ways to kind of make ends meet. So I think being in an interesting partnership perspective and how teams handle partners during times like this has definitely an ancillary effect on theft and fraud. And so that's always the ways we're looking at it, is where partnerships play into stuff like this, because it's just so important to our business model. And I think a really interesting point of view.
That's actually a great place to start this conversation, because I think at its core, this is about, you know, as a shipper, are you providing a rate that keeps your service provider sustainable? And sometimes that's in terms of CapEx around investing in assets or people to service you. Other times it's things like what we're talking about today, and you know, it is not free to combat the threat of theft and fraud right now. So are you providing a rate that enables them to be on solid financial footing to then serve you not just tomorrow but into the future? So Jordan, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing, especially since you're specialized in this area?
Yeah, I think when we started the year, we thought we were going to have a lot of headwinds around people's willingness to open up their wallets for something that doesn't add top line. What we've, you know, for us, where we sell or where we convince brokers and service providers to make the buy, is the ROI they're going to get from the reduction in fraudulent activity. You know, it's real. Like, it's a line item for a lot of service providers in this market, where they're dealing with stolen loads or hostage loads. Or double brokering payments, double payment on those carriers. That can add up into, for some brokers, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was a FreightWaves article about SEL. SEL was a freight broker based in Fort Worth that recently went out of business. And they had, earlier this year, they were using a provider, an onboarding provider, that let a carrier get in and steal a $700,000 load of casino machines. And as much as we tried to help after and, like, you know, kept fraud out after, they couldn't recover. The insurance claim got denied because of, they didn't properly vet the carrier, right? And so it was something they had to wear, and it ultimately put a 30-year brokerage out of business. And so, you know, there's motivation for service providers to be looking at technology that can help secure their networks, because the stakes are real. It's not just an inconvenience. It could actually take out your business.
Jordan, real quick before I bring Krenar in, can you give a sense of, and we're going to go into some of the specific types of things you're seeing, but can you give a sense of the scale? I'm sure it ranges, you know, wildly depending on the broker, but like how big a threat or how big an ROI potentially is there in investing in something to protect versus like top line revenue?
Yeah, it depends on what type of freight they move and how bad it's been for them. You know, there was one broker we signed on that had 40 stolen loads this year, and the ROI on highway is 10 to 20x. You know, they're paying back in 6 weeks, right? If not sooner.
Yep.
You know, so it just depends. It depends on the type of freight they're moving, how valuable that freight is, the urgency with which they are moving it, and how close they are to their carriers. You know, so that's kind of the matrix about how we think about the risk of a broker's freight being stolen. But it ranges, and that would be, I say, on the extreme side. But you know, we're trying to target brokers where we can see a payback period in 2 months or less.
Yeah, interesting. Krenar, I mean, your technology has a number of different use cases, but when did this sort of like cargo theft issue kind of become a you know, kind of a priority use case?
Cargo theft has always been around. I think I would say just based on, we help companies track shipments, every type of shipments, right? From fruits, vegetables to high value electronics. And obviously theft mostly happens on the high value items because then the resale value is still there. You can sell that product. Unfortunately, fortunately, it depends how you look at it. I think you started that with the right tone, Eric, in the beginning. The volume and the amount of tracking that we're doing for security purposes has started to go up quite a bit, I would say, in the last, from 18 months ago to up, but now it's starting to really ramp up. And whether it's in LATAM with a lot of companies signing up with Tive, in Mexico and other areas where with a lot of tracking that's required there, also in United States here. And one thing that you mentioned, I think Lucas, you nailed it like earlier. What kind of relationship do you want to really keep with the carrier? Because if you beat the carrier on price, then what happens is they start doing transloading. They open up the trailer, they unhinge it, they start putting whatever is empty in there, start loading it with other stuff so they can make extra money potentially. You don't want to put the carrier in a position where they have to figure out how to make money otherwise, or then they start hiring drivers that are not safe, right? That maybe there's an incentive that driver, why is he taking that load and getting a low pay? Maybe he is well connected in some other areas to potentially steal that load. So I think that service, doing carriers a favor now so that in the future when the rates go up, carrier actually does a favor to you too as a shipper. I think we've seen that a lot. That partnership is very important. But I guess fortunately for us in revenue, but unfortunately as far as the number of trackers that we're shipping for security related shipments has gone up quite a bit, Eric, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, interesting. So let's maybe get our arms around the profit margin issue. You know, if we strip out any of the concerns around cargo theft and fraud that we've been talking about and just look at the you know, supply demand situation right now, it's a difficult market for carriers and brokers. So they're already dealing with a margin issue, a margin preservation issue. How much of an impact is the theft and fraud stuff happening on that margin? Can we contextualize this or kind of put it in numerical terms? Maybe Jordan, I'll start with you.
I'll jump on it first. I mean,
you're at the tip of the spear on this. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that's not being talked about enough and solved is how this hurts small carriers. So the small carriers that, you know, if they're involved in a fictitious pickup as an unwitting party, the carrier that actually goes and picks up the load and drops it at the transloading warehouse, or they're the victim of 3 or 4 double brokers that they don't get paid on, they're done. They run on they're so tight right now. They're so tight on margin and liquidity. And, you know, I still stay very close to the factoring community, which is, you know, kind of where I came from with TriumphPay. And it's, in their words, it's beyond the worst they've ever seen it. And that's where, you know, I think as an industry, we don't do enough for carriers, and like where we're trying to step in and help carriers be more informed about who they're taking a load from, because in this market, they'll take a load from anybody. And I have a friend who I grew up with since kindergarten. His name's Clay Leahy, and he got hit for $800 last week. He's gonna miss his truck payment this month. And it's incredibly frustrating that they prey on people that don't have the budget to build, to buy technology to protect themselves, that are operating on real low margin, and there's nothing being done. There's nothing being done right now to, from a law enforcement side, because the dollar values are so small. And that's why these guys target this market, is they know they're operating $800, $1,200 a pop, and it's an incredibly hard crime to explain to law enforcement. It's incredibly hard to get it to a dollar value where law enforcement wants to engage. And so that's where we're trying to help those small carriers make better, let's call it buying decisions on what loads they're going to take from which brokers. They're the most exposed. Big brokers, large brokers can take a hit. They can even have a couple stolen loads and they're going to be all right. They may lose a shipper, they may have a bad quarter, people may miss their bonus payments, but it's these small carriers that are load to load that can be wiped out.
Yeah, it's an existential crisis, not an annoyance. It's interesting. We had an event in fall of 22 as the freight market was sort of turning down, and I led a panel about technology providers that were aiming to help small carriers in various ways, including factoring, including kind of TMS, including dispatch, just putting democratizing tech for smaller carriers. And honestly, the issue of fraud never even came up, right? I mean, that was a issue that I'm sure was out there still, but they just have running their business challenges that tech was trying to underpin, and this is like a whole nother thing that they probably never accounted for worrying about when they entered the business. So really interesting, Jordan, to put it in those terms. How are you guys seeing, Krenar and Lucas, how are you guys seeing the profit margin compression issue impact either more interest in what you're doing, or kind of conversely, are you seeing people say, look, I would love to invest and we need to invest, but we're just not in a place right now investment wise where we can?
Yeah. Krenar, you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think what's really interesting is, and as technology partners, all three of us here, our insight to some of the indirect effects that we often are trying to communicate to our customers. There's obviously the direct effects of the obvious loss, whatever was stolen. But what I think can be scary to businesses the most is what does that initial loss trigger? When that domino falls, what happens downstream? Like that, Jordan said, that really puts a company at risk of getting into a situation where that loss just amounts to a point where they can't recover. And I think when you're in crisis mode, like if margins are so thin, you're worried about like making the truck payment, making payroll. You sometimes lose track of, hey, those indirect effects that might come downstream. And so I think no matter what we're talking about, whether it's theft and fraud here or anything in business, some of those indirect effects are what really make or break you. And what I kind of have seen as some of the most impactful ones are loss of reputation and productivity, and then potential compliance impacts downstream as well. So reputation, it's obviously easier to keep an existing customer than get a new one. Productivity, now resources are dedicated to remedy this unexpected problem, collect information, make insurance claims, put out fires that were just unanticipated. I saw a really interesting kind of conversation around compliance though too. If you make enough noise, someone's going to listen. Sometimes that's the federal government, and sometimes that's not a good thing, and in the form of red tape that gets introduced or other things that might just dampen the whole situation. So that's kind of what I've seen, and we've, as a data provider that focuses on location data and just telling a more confident story with location data, focusing on those indirect effects has been a big thing for us.
So in other words, solve this commercially before it gets to the point where there's a new set of regulations that have unintended consequences.
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
Okay, interesting. Krenar?
I guess couple of things if some of you know, the reason why I started this company is because of my father-in-law trucking company. My wife's dad had a trucking company back in 2015 and trying to help him track his trucks. But he recently actually closed it. And if you think about, yes, that's part of it, potentially retirement, looking at his age, but part of it, most of it, I would say, was the market. And 3-4 months ago, he's thinking, do I stay here open and barely make any money? What if I get in with one more insurance claim and lose everything I have, or just shut it down right now? And that's what he did. He decided that this year is the year to, because it's just the worst year to keep a carrier running, and he shut it down. So just, I think these are affecting people's lives too, if you think about it, and what then decisions they're making, whether they want to stay in this business or not, which is really difficult. And as far as shippers and their profit margins, what we've started to see is some of them say, we used to have a team that would watch shipments, monitor these shipments. Why don't we just hire you guys to do that, because it's just cheaper. We pay a few dollars extra per shipment, and then you guys do the monitoring, but that way we can reduce our OPEX. And you do that work as Tive, and we don't have to. So we're seeing some of that also.
Yeah, tracking as a managed service, essentially. Yeah,
Right.
Very interesting. Okay, well, I think we've done a lot of like scene setting. Can we get into some specifics around what types of fraud and theft sort of schemes are out there? I've had I won't say 1,000, but like a lot of conversations, and at virtually every domestic logistics event I've been to in the last half year, this has been a major area of focus, if not on the program, in the sidelines, right? Like everybody is talking about this to an extent that I've never seen before. So I think one of the challenges is there's a set of kind of practices that's happening right now. And depending, and some of them are targeting small carriers, some of them are targeting shippers themselves, receivers, right? And then there's a whole bunch that we don't even know about yet that may be percolating up right now that might be the next big kind of thing. So can we give people kind of like a laundry list of the different flavors of this right now? And obviously we could probably spend the rest of the hour just going through these. So maybe hit the ones that are most common right now, and then some ones that are on your radar that are sort of percolating up. Krenar, maybe why don't you start off?
I mean, I'm gonna go into details. I'll go into details on how we've caught them, what the things have happened and all of that, right? But there's a lot of cases where it's happening, as I just mentioned with transloading, where they are unhinging the door when leaving the seal unbroken so that the seal still stays intact, and then loading it with other stuff and then closing it back again. There's cases where they're going out there somewhere in a field, 2 trucks back to back one another, opening the trailers and moving loads from one to the other. Then there's cases that I can go into, I'll tell you example a little bit later, where they're moving something other than products. So it's happening quite a bit.
Yep. Jordan, what sorts of, if you had to do a top 3?
Yeah, no, let me hit it as, the types of what they're financially trying to achieve. Let's talk about those, because that doesn't necessarily change. And then talk about some of the vectors, which the vectors are constantly changing about how they're trying to accomplish one of these forms of fraud. So the first one's the stolen load that results from a fictitious pickup. So let's just talk about that one. And this is their Powerball lottery ticket. These guys these fraudulent actors are playing for lottery tickets, and this is the Powerball. So they are trying to steal a load from a shipper that they know has high value loads. So they'll target things like liquor, sports drinks, solar panels, copper, right? They go after those things. And what they're doing is they're trying to get a hold of the rate confirmation. That's their ticket. So once they get a hold of the rate confirmation in their hands, they now have the ability to show up at the dock and pick it up. And so how do they get that rate confirmation is they may have a load phishing campaign where they see a broker post a load on a public load board, and they know based on the zip codes that that's a Tito's vodka load. And so they're going after them, and they're going after the carrier sales reps. They're looking on LinkedIn to see how long someone's been at that broker, and they're going after the young men and women who haven't been there very long, who are more naive, and they are sending emails pretending to be a carrier that's already in that broker's network. And they're doing that now because it's harder for them to onboard, it's harder for them to get through that process, it's harder for them to obfuscate the contact details through the connection process. But once they get that rate con, it's incredibly sophisticated how they move the freight. And it just shows you that, like, these aren't guys in a basement just jacking around with something, but this is their full-time occupation, and they're very dynamic and good. So they have that rate con. They then go as a broker authority and post that load back on the load board or find another carrier and have a legitimate carrier unwittingly pick up that load and take it to another warehouse. And they're not to where it's supposed to go, but to another warehouse that they control. They then drop it there and they'll let it set for 48 hours because they're trying to check and make sure there's not a Tive device on it, right? They're trying to make sure that they don't have some something laying in there, but sometimes they do, and that's how Tive helps people find freight. But then what they'll do is, after they let it set for 48 hours, they'll then go have another carrier, unwittingly, a legitimate carrier, go pick up that load from the transload warehouse and then take it to a port or take it to somewhere else to break it down and to move it into the black market. They can do all that without ever setting foot in the US. They can orchestrate that entire crime from overseas. And they have ripped off a shipper, a broker, and 2 legitimate carriers who are none of them are getting paid. And like that is the sophistication level we're dealing with.
Yep.
So that's the most egregious one. But I would say the vectors about how they're trying to get to that fictitious pickup continually change. You know, the load fishing is big right now. That's kind of new. Changing FMCSA contact information. They're using that vector where they're trying to get the FMCSA to change the email or phone on file. They've been successful at 500 carriers. They've been able to change the FMCSA contact on over 500 carriers. They're good. I mean, they're insane at how good they are at spoofing and phishing people to get them to do what they want. You wanted to ask something, Eric?
No, I have a bunch of questions. So how did that evolve? So in other words, Krenar said something that's absolutely true at the start. He said theft has always been there. I would imagine fraud to a certain degree has always been there. What in the market changed for them to think there's now as big an opening as there ever has been, and to develop these sort of sophisticated, you know, schemes essentially?
I can go first to let one of the panelists go first. Okay. It's several things hitting at once. So one of the macro trends is the rising. Well, let's talk about how freight fraud happens, right? So freight fraud is like fire. So fire needs oxygen, fuel, and heat to survive, right? And so firefighters try and take out one of those 2 elements when they're putting out a fire. So freight fraud needs anonymity, urgency, and financial gain. And so to Krenar's point, like, it's always been there. People have been stealing loads since they put it on a ship and brought it, you know, been putting them on ships and moving freight that way. But what's changed over the last 30 years is the rise in brokered freight. Brokered freight went from 0% of for-hire transportation before American backhaulers to now, I think it's close to half based on the data we see on the factoring side. And brokered freight introduces anonymity, right? You're introducing a third party who doesn't see or touch the carrier, who doesn't see or touch the shipper, or doesn't see or touch the consignee physically. And so that level of anonymity, as that grew, as more and more loads transacted with that anonymous nature to them, it opened the door for more and more fraud. The second thing is the urgency. As brokers have taken more market share in the for-hire transportation, freight is moving with more urgency. There's less of a lead time. And anytime you need to move freight with urgency, that carrier sales rep is going to push the limits on compliance to get the load moved, to get the financial outcome. And then the last part is just this freight recession has hit people really, really hard. And if you think about what's happened, is if we had, you know, say 100 carrier MCs in the market, the reduction in the people leaving the market are the good carriers, are the real carriers, the people that actually have trucks and drive, like Krenar's father. They're leaving, and that capacity is leaving. But who aren't leaving are the fraudulent actors. And so while it feels like this is, you know, unprecedented levels of fraud, in reality, it's just their share of the total, the share of MC numbers that are fraudulent is higher because the good guys can't make it in this market, but the bad guys, like, their margin profile is really strong. So I talked a lot, but that's my opinion on why we have
No,
it.
that's awesome. That's awesome background. Lucas, anything on your end of
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, you can hear in the passion for Jordan's voice, is the respect and the acknowledgement for the sophistication of your opponent. Like, you got to do that to understand, okay, I need to fight this at the highest degree I can with the most advanced things I can and all that. This is kind of unrelated to freight, but I think as technology just in all sectors increases, it gives fraudulent or bad actors the ability to come at you with a whole quiver of tools. And my grandma got a call the other day. AI made it sound like my voice, calling from Whitefish, Montana, said I needed cash to get out of jail or something. I didn't know what she said. And it's just, like you said, targeting maybe, like in this industry, Jordan, new people or newer people at the brokerage and stuff like that. There's no relentlessness. They're not relenting up on who they're going after. And I think just acknowledging that, the sophistication and the access to the tools they have is a really important step to start to combat it.
I think, I mean, obviously these threats are not running in parallel, they're overlapped, right? The cybersecurity threat in general, and then the you know, fraud, right? I think most people in our industry tend to think of cybersecurity as a pure play for ransom, or, you know, nothing to do with necessarily the operational side of the physical operational side of the business. And where this is intersected is now where cybersecurity meets kind of very knowledgeable actors impacting that physical operational side. So that's super interesting. But I still think most of the industry is still getting to grips with the cybersecurity side of it. And so the lag on understanding all the different threats on the cargo theft and fraud side is probably a few months beyond that even. Well, let's maybe go a little more in depth with how the three of your companies are sort of helping combat this. Krenar, you've talked a bit about it, but this is probably a good time to go a little bit deeper into maybe a use case or two in terms of your tech I can use it to just know that the humidity level on my shipment has stayed constant without any worry about anyone necessarily stealing it or any fraud happening in the background. What's an example of kind of how you play in this space now?
Yeah, so the good thing, what we do and how we do it, I guess maybe it's more important. We have these trackers that people press a button and put it on a shipment. Now they can also hide it, right? So it doesn't have to stay on top of a pallet, so a truck driver knows that it's there. They can also put it inside one of the boxes, inside of any kind of electronic, like TV, solar panel. So then that way, whoever's moving it doesn't even know it exists. So that the simplicity of it, I think, is important here. However, one thing we have on top of temperature, humidity, Eric, like you mentioned, is we also have a light sensor. So this light sensor can detect if somebody opens a trailer or opens a container in real time. And there was a case where, I'm not going to name the products, but think of high value. And we detected a light sensor, we alerted, they saw the alert, they changed the settings of the tracker so that it pings even more often, and let's say every 5 minutes, and they turned on GPS to know exactly where it is. And they realized it's in the middle of the field. They called Richie and they're like, Richie, is this real? And Richie's like, yes, it's 100% real. And it's in that field, and they were able to call the police, and the police saw what I mentioned earlier, 2 trailers back to back moving loads from one other to the other, and they were able to save $750,000 on that load. Which, again, now maybe they need to inspect it before they sell it out. There's a reputation, there's a lot of things, but at least it's not gone. Another case has been with a customer on one of the products that you mentioned earlier, Jordan. In the first 6 days, we noticed they saw a light sensor. They're like, this is in the warehouse, what's happening? And it's the transloading concept that you just mentioned. They were opening it up and trying to putting more product in that shipper, and they were able to catch this particular carrier and work with them so that this doesn't happen again. But on the first one that I mentioned, they were able to, like when they started, they caught 6 or 7 times. So think of like 6-7 times at $500,000 to $750,000. That's a multi-million-dollar savings for a customer with putting something that's fairly inexpensive on every single shipment. So
And-
these
and-
are just some examples.
And just to give people a sense, you have a few different types of trackers. Like, are they affixed to a trailer? Are they affixed to a shipment, a pallet, a product? Like how
All of our products essentially get attached onto a pallet, onto a shipment. So whether you're shipping electronics, blueberries, strawberries, whether you're shipping COVID test kits, you're putting this on a shipment. So most of the time, this is going on top of a pallet, sometimes on the side of the pallet, sometimes somewhere where you cannot see it, but the light can detect it. I mean, they're clever on the fraud side, but I think people shipping are also clever. So, which is a good news. But that's how this works. It actually goes on the product.
Got it. I want to circle back after you guys have all talked about your individual things to the ROI. I know Jordan touched on that a little bit, but I think that's a key piece of that. So I'll circle back on that. Lucas, can you kind of give us a sense of how geofencing, factors into this equation?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's kind of a funky little data niche, but something that's just super powerful. And from the start, so geofencing in its simplest form is just a virtual boundary anywhere on Earth, and it's there to help automate tracking. And geofences spit out 3 very simple timestamps that are really the essence of everything that comes downstream after interacting with the geofence. So arrival time. When did you break that geofence from the outside in and enter its area? How long time spent inside? So how long were you inside that geofence's defined area? And then departure time. When did you break that geofence boundary from the inside out? And what geofences do, and what we at Kestrel Insights are really in the business of, is we're in the business of confidence, and confidence in the story that your data is telling you, confidence in anything that depends on a geofence for your arrival times, departure times, dwell, anything you're tracking there. So there's no shadow of a doubt, if you're making business decisions based on data from a geofence, and you're confident in what you're doing going forward. So with Kestrel Insights, kind of what we do is you can submit an address, a GPS point, or a POI list, a point of interest list, like Walmarts or airports or container terminals, and get those geofences back to use in your systems. So there's no more drawing polygons on a map, no more circles, just a higher level of accuracy to the story that your geofences are telling you, and things like that. I don't know if we want to dive into some benefits now, if we want to circle back, but that's kind of what we do from a high level.
Yeah, I would like to right now, and also the one question that comes to mind is what are some of the kind of configurations of this? I would imagine they vary depending on the customer, but are we talking about like a sort of facility, like you mentioned, a receiving facility or a container terminal? Is anyone kind of building geofences around corridors where products are moving continuously between 2 areas? How does that actually manifest in terms of your customer arrangements?
Yeah, it's a great question, because when we started, it was originally that first concept: submit an address for a US based warehouse, get a geofence back. And very quickly, people started coming to us for use cases that I would have never predicted. Corridors, like entire toll roads, border crossings, container terminals, embassies, all kinds of different things. I know we've already talked about Richie Krenar, but he had an interesting example in the fraud space of doing entire states, because someone was hacking into a TMS, getting phone numbers to change the destinations of loads or something, and they saw a tendency of these going to Texas. So they're like, hey, nothing should ever go to Texas. Let's geofence all of Texas. If anything ever gets close or goes in there, we're notified. So yeah, what the geofence can cover, we've seen incredible growth there. And what it's really come to for us is any node of the supply chain where you want to know those 3 timestamps: arrival, departure, and time spent within, whether that's a corridor, airport, seaport, warehouse, anything like that. So yeah, we've seen quite a gamut of what people have run with on requests for us.
I think the state of Texas is probably the biggest geofenced area that I've ever heard about. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
just really quickly on the benefits that, maybe people, I mean, I think most people can probably understand the way you describe it, but like, what are maybe some benefits that they're not necessarily thinking of?
Yeah, so for us, no matter what it is, whether it's that toll road, the state of Texas, or a copper mine in Africa, all these crazy applications, for us, it comes down to two things: automation and accuracy. So automation in the sense of how you actually obtain the geofence. Right now, on many different platforms, there's two options. You basically drop in an address or a GPS point and draw a radius around that. There's inherent issues with the accuracy of that because nothing's a perfect circle. So you're either going to make the circle so big that you include areas you don't intend to have, or you're going to make the circle too small and miss areas that are important. And that geofence doesn't tell the right story to a high level of confidence. So the other option is, on any system, you can basically go to a map and address by address, one at a time, sit there and draw a really accurate polygon. Tells a better story from a data perspective, but it's a very manual process. So for us, automation in terms of submit an address or a GPS point for whatever you need and get that polygon geofence back. So it's the accuracy of polygons and the automation of some of the circular methods out there. So that's really where a lot of the benefits come from. And then those indirect effects that I talked about earlier really comes from the accuracy. And what are the feedback you're getting from geofences, and are you confident in what it's telling you? We had some interesting use cases around trailer pool applications, and as users are going to drop off trailers at different spots, the whole idea is that you can automate, check out, leave the trailer and go. And this team was having issues with circular geofences where it was including gravel areas next to a lock secure drop yard. So technically the person could pull up, and this happened, pull up, check out, because the system says, yeah, according to the geofence in your location, you're in the right spot. So those fine margins of error can create a big issue where the accuracy is really, really important.
And Krenar, I assume Tive is interfacing with Kestrel to sort of, point in space when it enters
100%.
the area. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've noticed is, just as an example, right? Logan Airport, Boston Logan Airport. We could draw it, but the amount of time it would take for us to draw one airport, and then we got to draw every single airport. We just work with Lucas and get all the drawings of all the airports, all the container ports, every port out there. Now we know immediately when a shipment arrives, it's at Logan or it's at JFK, and we don't have to create these geofences. They were already pre-made and work with Kestrel's team, which was awesome. But that also ties into the point that you made, Jordan, with a warehouse, right? When they do the fishing, they tell customer, well, ship it to warehouse Z. If it's not going to the geofence at this time that you suspected it would go to, now you can get an alert and say, hey, this is not the warehouse supposed to go to.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. That's the complementary part that I had mentioned earlier between the three of us. Jordan, we've obviously heard your passion about this subject and depth of knowledge about this subject, but I don't know, probably a good time to explain a little bit more in depth what you're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Highway is carrier identity. And so what that means is we answer 3 questions for freight brokers when a motor carrier is trying to work with them. The first is, who are you? So we tied a carrier to a digital session that's MFA based. There's no passwords in Highway. I hate passwords with passion. They're insecure and broken, and they need to be left in the 90s. But so what that does is it forces people to reveal who they really are and where they really are. So that's the first component, who are you? The second is, are you really the carrier? So we want to make sure that the person who's trying to engage with a broker digitally to get in their network is really an authorized representative of that motor carrier, and that the motor carrier hasn't changed ownership, or something hasn't happened, an event hasn't happened that would cause the history of that pattern of that motor carrier to be fundamentally different from the go forward. And then the third thing is, what equipment do you actually have, and where is it? So Highway has a fleet tool. We don't allow carriers to enter their equipment data in Highway. We go get it from third-party sources like insurance companies, financial service providers, DMVs, and we go and aggregate that data so that we can show a broker what equipment's really registered and insured to that motor carrier. A big component of that is telematics and getting the ELD connection and verifying that they have trucks, and they have a power unit in the area that can feasibly pick up the load you're about to give them. And that's where, working with people like Krenar and Lucas to help us start to say, I'm not going to give you a rate confirmation unless I know you can really pick up this load. And it's just for good actors, it should be flow seamlessly and not impact their day-to-day business. And for people that are trying to fraudulently pick up loads or fraudulently operate, it'll make their lives very miserable. And it does make their lives miserable. So we reduce fraudulent activity by about 97% in our brokers platforms. That last 3% is where we are focused on today, and it's these continuing changing vectors that we respond to. And a lot of that's like we talked about around the rate confirmation delivery process. So that's our new products that we announced at the TIA, Load Lock, where we are actually delivering the rate confirmation on behalf of the broker to make sure it gets to the right person at the carrier, and then auditing the movement of that actual load, seeing if it's in a high risk zip code, checking that against their telematics data to make sure they're actually running the load, those type of things. So that's Highway.
How does your product sort of fit in the workflow of a broker? Like they're explain the process of what they're doing and where the information that you're providing them steps in on the decision-making process.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning of at the very tip of the spear, when they're trying to source carriers and onboard carriers. So Highway has a sourcing component where they're looking at the carrier and Highway to see if they pass the broker's rules assessment, whether there's any fraudulent activity that's been reported or any fraud indicators on the carrier before they work with them. They're onboarding the carriers with Highway, and that takes them through this dynamic process that's built on this concept of a risk matrix. So we don't think about all carriers the same. So every carrier has a different experience in Highway on purpose to make it hard for fraudulent actors to be able to try and brute force their way through. But then also, like, if you're a 50 truck carrier with tons of history and been around for 15 years, I don't want to wear you out in Highway. I want you to get through as quickly and as easily as possible. If you got 3 months authority and you haven't been able to show that you have physical presence anywhere in the United States of America, life's going to be a lot harder. You're going to take a lot longer and harder to get through Highway. We're going to make you prove to us that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. And that's the fundamental difference. You know, prior to Highway, brokers would have to rely on trust that carrier really was going to pick up that load or really could pick up that load. And we want to make that, you know, we want to trust but verify, you know, like we do in the financial services world, where if we're going to lend you $250,000, we're going to know a lot about you as a banker. And it's crazy in today's world, they'll give a $250,000 load to someone they've never met, no information about, no idea where they're going, where they're coming from. And we just want to bring that level of KYC to the transportation community.
So you're involved
with that's how they interact with it.
Yeah, you're involved in the onboarding vetting stage, not at necessarily the transaction by transaction stage. Or is there a component of it where it cross-checks against what the information that they submitted when they were being onboarded?
Yeah, exactly. So we do look at per load or per movement, we call them per movement data for our brokers and compare, is the carrier have if the carrier's got 2 power units, but they're on 6 loads across 3 brokers, that's an alert, right? That sets off a series of actions that helps brokers proactively find out, hey, this person's overbooked. There's no way they're running 6 loads right now. They only have 2 trucks. Are they actually headed towards the origin when they're supposed to head towards the origin using the telematics data, things like that. So yes, it does happen on a per movement basis.
Cool. Well, that's super helpful. And hopefully everyone seems very clear to me. So, so let's kind of segue into, I mean, we've alluded to this a bunch about how you all are complementary and just in terms of a bigger conversation around integrations and how potential users, whether it's a 3PL, Jordan, using you or Krenar and Lucas, it sounds like you might have various different customer segments that could potentially enlist you, right? What's sort of the entry point to the, you know, the integrations that the 3 of you might have kind of in the background to support you know, an initiative to combat freight? Like, if I'm a broker, I'm going to Jordan and I'm tapping in potentially to what Lucas and Krenar are doing. If I'm a shipper, I might start with Krenar and get the benefit of my broker being used by Jordan. How do those sort of permutations work?
I mean, it can be, I mean, there's a lot of synergies between all 3. And I think if you're a shipper, I think that's where we come into play more, right? And what we could do is provide this data in real time to Jordan after the load gets picked up to make sure that that carrier is behaving how they're supposed to behave, and that brokers picked up the right load and shipped the right carrier to pick up that load. And then there's verification process there. That could be something that we could do. And I think the other area with the warehouses that we mentioned, what are some of the zip codes that are not safe? I think Lucas, you also mentioned that, and Jordan, you guys have that. Maybe with geofences around those zip codes, so that the moment something gets pinged in one of those zip codes, they're immediately an investigation that's happening that's quick and understand if that was supposed to be driven that way or something's happening that's not normal. And that can be an automatic thing. That way, nothing needs to get configured. Lucas and Jordan provided Lucas's the zip codes. Lucas has a API integration that said dangerous zip codes. And then that I download all the dangerous through his API, dangerous geofences. And then the moment something gets through a date, I'm just making it up here, right? That could be an easy thing for a service that we could provide to a shipper.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of curious, like,
Yeah.
I guess my question was more about, and those are interesting use cases. I guess my question was more about, like, how pre-configured is some of this versus, no, I'm a customer of yours, Krenar, and I have a window into potentially accessing all of this other, kind of tools to help me combat this that I hadn't even maybe thought of before I started engaging with you on this.
Yeah, actually, maybe Jordan, just how configurable is the API integration in your end? So, because customers, when they create shipments, they put the carrier name, they put all the information, right? Is there a way for it to show green or red once they're doing that by calling your API?
Yeah, so I think, Eric, we're in early stages with everyone here, I think, and how we button all this up. But I think in simplest terms, a shipper should go buy Tive. They should use Tive in their shipments to track. That's the first thing. And the second thing is they tell their brokers to use Highway, and we don't sell directly to shippers, we sell only brokers, but they can tell brokers, hey, here's my rule set. For these zip codes, telematics has to be enabled on the carrier before they can pick up. And then you combine that with what Tive is doing, fictitious pickup becomes very difficult to do. So that's I think the easiest thing to tell a shipper to do after this call is go buy Tive and make their brokers use Highway to enforce telematics for their high-risk zip codes. And I think that solves a whole lot of problems.
And make sure they're using Kestrel inside geofences because they're the most accurate one.
Yeah. And then Krenar and I buy from Lucas directly. So Lucas has for the shippers. Yeah. Sorry, Lucas. Sorry.
No, you're good. I think kind of interesting part of your question too, Eric, is like that ability to integrate. And Tive's been an awesome example of, hey, this is our core competency is tracking or things like that. We have geofences that support a lot of what we do. Let's partner with someone like Lucas who's doing a great job at that. So like that integration was really easy. And there's other companies out there that we've interacted with that have open APIs that allow for us to tie directly onto their geofencing activities. That just makes it easy, where they're like, hey, let's really grow in this partnership environment and kind of all boats rise together and be stronger together. Where we've run into customers who or a potential customer would come to us, they're a carrier, and they're like, hey, saw what you guys are doing. I use this telematics. I'd love to automate my geofencing. We're like, great, let's figure out how we can get it in there and stuff like that. And we'll run into a ton of roadblocks with the technology provider where I don't know if they see it as a threat, or they don't like the idea of outsourcing to a third party, like a data provider like that, but then we can't eventually deliver for the end user. So I think that obviously hurts us. We'd love to bring them on, but I think it hurts the reputation with that technology provider, because the customer's like, hey, I identified a problem. I don't know if you can't maybe deliver it right away, but work with me to get there with Kestrel. That helps a lot. I worry that user is maybe like, hey, maybe I can shop around for another telematics. So I think just the willingness and openness to integrate and want to integrate is really interesting, and how different people approach that. And I think you see it with the success of those that are kind of willing to tackle problems together.
Oh, it's crazy. The last 5 years, the explosion. I mean, we've been talking about the topic at hand today, but the explosion in integrations between different technology companies or between 3PLs and technology companies is like off the charts. And I don't even think people understand how powerful that's become, and how quickly companies have been able to get off the ground where they may have struggled in the past. So, well, we have a few minutes left. I would love to get your thoughts on kind of like maybe some predictions about where this all goes going forward. Maybe are we around the corner from potentially getting our arms around it a little bit better and getting, where everybody in the industry is close to that 97%, as opposed to far less percent that if they're not using highway, Jordan, or some technology development that you see having a big impact going forward on helping solve this? Like, obviously, as we've mentioned, the threat is going to keep evolving. The motivation is not going away. Is it a regulatory thing against Lucas's hopes and dreams? Is it a regulatory solution, right? Like, what are some predictions about where this goes in the next couple of years?
Maybe I'll jump in just quick.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So just, I mean, on a high level, one analogy that I would have is if you think of home security, if you have ADT, Ring, Simply Safe, thieves, when they see those things, they see the cameras, they usually leave those places alone, I'm assuming, I hope. But it's created a sense of security. So theft in those areas has gone down quite a bit. But the moment you don't see a camera, you don't see a Ring sticker or a ADT sticker, things are not happening. So what's going to happen, and I always bring this, right, the cost of these trackers are going to continue to go down over time. And as they become in more shipments, and they go into more shipments, as every shipment gets tracked, I think the theft, like the incentive there, they'll know that, let's say, imagine a sticker that's security sticker outside of a trailer that is being tracked, and that shipment's being tracked. As a thief, you really don't want to touch that, because then you're gonna get in trouble pretty fast. That's one thing. I think that's gonna happen more and more, and hopefully the number of thefts are gonna go down because of that.
And Krenar, you and I have talked about this before too. There's a sort of critical mass piece to this too, right? Like if 5% of shipments are being tracked, that means the preponderance are not. But if you get to 20, 30, 40, then a thief starts to think, well, something in that trailer is being tracked.
It's got something. Yeah, exactly. We're still early on that stage.
Herd immunity from a tracking perspective.
Right. Yeah, Lucas, give us the anti-regulatory prediction we need.
Gosh, I don't know if I have one for that, but what I was talking with someone interesting about this the other day. I think the Airbnb model gets referred to in so many different scenarios. And what I thought was interesting about the Airbnb model is how it really empowered the masses of an industry, hospitality, to get involved, and just the value that brought. It empowered homeowners and things like that to bring just a new perspective to the industry that totally changed it, especially for families and groups traveling, and instead of going to hotels and things like that. I think some kind of technology thing that does that empowers the masses for this industry, which I really see as the drivers. I don't know what it is, but in some way it just incentivizes or gamifies or does something great for them to just, they're just boots on the ground all over the place with drivers. And I think something interesting that really empowers them would be just an incredible breakthrough, whether it's their vehicle data or just, I don't know what it is, but I think really mobilizing such a massive group there is some really untapped potential that I don't know what it is. I don't have a specific answer for it yet, but I thought that was a really interesting.
That's a great thought,
thing.
Actually. That's a great thought. And I think people are just starting to see the power of those independent drivers, even if they're with a company, right? Yeah. Jordan, take us home.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that Krenar hit on three things. One is be the hardest target. So as people are putting Tive stickers on Tive trackers, and then the Tive sticker, like you're talking about ADT, or just even the highway, they know when they're about to onboard the broker, they see highway and they decide they'll go chase someone else. Being the hardest target is a first layer. The second is closing the surface area. And from the tracking side is what he talked about. How do we get more and more of these tracks so that the surface area of attack becomes smaller and smaller? And we think about that at highway. How do we reduce down the unknowns of the carrier networks in the US so that there's less and less opportunity for someone to come in? And both of those together create what is the only way to really win this war. And as we think about the dividing line of when we're starting to win the war, is they're always going to play for lotto tickets, the fraudulent actors. We have to increase the cost of the lotto ticket where it doesn't make it worth it. So, before, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, when we got into this industry, the risk we saw was that the cost for an attack was pennies of what these fraudulent actors were doing. They could onboard us whoever they wanted. They could change carriers, dispatch contact information. It was just the Wild West. And so they had basically zero marginal cost. And now, you know, with some of the incidents we've seen, the cost to execute by these guys is probably $10,000 to get it done, to get the you know, to get to it. By the time they'd spend all the money to set the scheme up and get it done, and that's advancement, right? That's what we're looking for. And the goal is to get this work costing $50,000 to $100,000 to execute a transaction, and then it becomes cost prohibitive from that side. And that's how we make them go away and go into healthcare, you know, or go into some other industry. Sorry, healthcare, or whatever, you know, right? You know, like something, right? You just got to get them out of our industry, right?
Out of our industry, yeah.
But,
someone else's
yeah,
fault.
and I'm with Lucas. Like, you know, the answer, you know, the people that are saying the government needs to solve this for us. Like, first, we need better hygiene as an industry before we start asking the government to come save us, right? We need to do things better. The second is, like, you know, the most dangerous words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," and this is according to Ronald Reagan. So just, you know, what they come in and do is not going to be what you like. And then the third is the state of California will not prosecute this crime. They will not prosecute cargo theft. Like the FBI and other law enforcement bodies have hit an absolute stonewall with certain states that just aren't willing to prosecute it because of the cost, and they just don't like the optics of it. So, you know, the idea that the government's going to save us, I'm not there. I think we got to take the action ourselves.
Well, we just heard an hour of commercial solutions to this problem before it ever gets down that road. So Jordan, Lucas, Krenar, awesome discussion. I feel like we could have gone on for another hour easily on this, but we will leave you all to do your homework and figure out. Obviously, any of our panelists today, they'll be welcome a reach out and to talk more about this. And I would be delighted to talk more about it too. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thanks Jordan, thanks Lucas, thanks Krenar for an awesome discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks everyone.